We are now less than a month from the start of the 2023 Formula 1 season, so I'm going to be predicting the entire 2023 World Drivers' standings.
Through goes Leclerc! Through goes Verstappen's down the inside!
Now it's a game of chess.
Kevin Magnussen,
In P20, I have Logan Sargeant. The man from the US of A is a driver who I don't rate massively. He had a pretty unconvincing car racing junior career, with a highlight being a third place finish in the FIA Formula 3 Championship in 2020. Overall, the way the grid has worked out this year is quite surprising to me. For years we've been talking about an overabundance of talent not able to break into Formula 1, though this year I feel the opposite is true. Formula 2 was won by Felipe Drugovich, who achieved this feat on his third attempt after some uninspiring finishes in the previous years. The hottest talent previously without a seat was Oscar Piastri, though I'll get onto him later, and De Vries has signed with AlphaTauri. Overall, does this guy deserve a seat? Probably not. Is he better than Latifi? Well, looking at the junior careers, maybe not. Overall, if this guy was anything other than American or maybe British, would he have a seat? No. For me, while I would be pleasantly surprised if he does do well, I expect this guy to be the new Latifi, but without the bucks to back up the performances. In P19, I'm sorry Tomo, but it's Alex Albon. The Thai British driver has flourished at Williams outside of the boiling pot of the Red Bull family. With this said, I do not expect strong performances from the Williams car, as I feel the team is in a bit of a state of disrepair. Click on the eye in the top corner to find out more about that mess. But yeah, Alex Albon will drive a little bit like George Russell in 2020, very strongly but in no man's land. Nonetheless, I think we'll look back on some solid drives, albeit with not too many points. In P18, I'm going to place Guanyu Zhou. Now, before you all get your pitchforks out, hear me out. In the second half of the 2022 season, Alfa Romeo Sauber's performance dropped off a cliff. They were last in the championship if you only took positions from the back end of the season, and they struggled to impress much of the F1 community post-Belgium. Hence, as the weaker of the driver pairing, I think we're going to see him struggle in F1. I also think that Alfa will struggle for this era of F1 until Audi come in 2026, especially with the loss of a mainstay in the team in the form of Fred Vasseur, though this is one of the predictions where I would not be surprised if I look back at this prediction and turn out to be dead wrong. In P17, I've got Nyck De Vries. The AlphaTauri team have looked weak to say the least in 2022, even with the rocket ship of a Red Bull powertrain under the bonnet. Additionally, with the loss of Pierre Gasly as their lead driver, I think car development is going to struggle in 2023. Now, in terms of Nyck himself, I rate him extremely highly. He is a driver who is mature, fast, and a serial winner in previous endeavours, and the fact that it has taken this long to find him an F1 seat is just criminal. With that said, I do think that he will be very close to Yuki and has the higher potential to become one of the mainstays of the sport in a midfield team, though I think he will fall short by a couple of points this season. In P16, I have Nico is a very strong driver, though I think his hiatus from the sport will be to his detriment. But with that said, he is just the driver Haas need to battle in the midfield. He isn't a rookie, so should slot right into some point scoring positions, which is just what Haas need to stay in the sport. I'd like to see him perform like he did for Racing Point in Silverstone. I still don't think he'll get that elusive podium though. In P15, we have Valtteri Bottas. Now, as stated, I think the Alpha will struggle. However, I also think that Valtteri is just levels above Zhou. The man named Lewis Hamilton's best ever teammate, Valtteri has found his home at Alpha. I expect him to fully extract every morsel out of that car, though it will be tight in these positions. In P14, I have Yuki Tsunoda. Now, Yuki is touch and go for me. He could be great, he could be awful. He does have experience firmly under the belt and did close the gap firmly to Pierre Gasly as a teammate last season, who, may I remind you, is a race winner. I also think that this is a make or break season for Japan's angriest driver, and he will be driving for his life out there. Overall, I'm not too sure how he will do, but for the purpose of this tier list, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But I would love to know what you lot think. Let me know in the comments below. In P13, I have Mr. Pole Position himself, Kevin Magnussen. K-Mag had a magnificent 2022, obviously highlighted by the pole position, and an array of strong results. With that new Haas MoneyGram sponsorship and a lot of focus on these regulations, I think that the Haas team will deliver K-Mag a car to occasionally fight for some significant points places, from which I'm confident that he will capitalise on. He has been at that Haas team, excluding his hiatus, for 8 years now, joining the team in 2016, so if there's anyone that can make the most of a Haas, it's K-Mag. In P12, I have Oscar Piastri. As a fan of McLaren, it hurts to put Piastri here. Now don't get me wrong, for a rookie season, the Aussie will perform just brilliantly. In a club with some great drivers like Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, Oscar won F3 and F2 back to back on his first time of asking, and the fact that he didn't previously have a seat is an absolute joke. Putting Oscar in P12 is not a dig at him, but a reflection of where I see the McLaren team performance. McLaren sounds seriously worried about this season if you look at the interviews in and around the team, and with a new wind tunnel still not built until next year, I think that the McLaren team will slip back and be leapfrogged by Aston, who comparatively look on the up. One thing I am very excited to see how it plays out is the dynamic between the teammates, as in recent years, Lando has been less cosy with his teammates. In P11, I have Lance Stroll. My first ever F1 related video, like the one you're watching now, was about Lance. I think that this driver is probably the most slept on driver on the grid, and if he were not a pay driver, I feel that he would be compared to the Bottases of the world. Now yes, obviously I agree that his career has plateaued in the Aston Martin era, but I think a P11 finish would be good for Lance. While he probably won't get everything out of the car on every weekend, for me, he has proven that in a semi-competitive car, which I think he will be given, he can perform solidly. With that praise out of the way, I do think that he will be no match for the most destructive man in Formula 1, Fernando Alonso. In P10, I have Lando Norris. Lando. Where do I start? This driver is one who unequivocally should be in a Mercedes, Red Bull or Ferrari without a doubt. For me, he is easily the best midfield driver, but with that said, while he will extract everything from that MCL 60, I just don't see there being too much to extract, and overall with the loss of Andreas Seidel, I'm not confident in the short-term future of McLaren, so reluctantly, I predict Lando to be in P10. Though I would love almost nothing more than to be wrong with this one. In P9, I predict Fernando Alonso. This geezer is 41 and still has that dog in him. The wily old fox will be battling with the McLarens and the Alpines. I think that we will have some great performances, though if he comes to blows with Lance, I think we could see some of the funniest team radios and actions in F1 history. P8 was a really tricky one, Ocon or Gasly. Ultimately, I went with Gasly. I do predict that they will be close together throughout the season, as I feel that in equal machinery they could have very close race pace. Now, looking at the history between these two, this partnership is going to be spicy. I predict a teammate relationship circa Force India 2017, and I just really think that the battle to be that lead driver in Alpine is going to be fierce. Ultimately though, with the teammates that Gasly has had, I think it's quite tricky to pinpoint his actual performance. Hence, this season could either expose him as a fraud or a great. Over a whole season though, I think the experience that Ocon has within the team will just about edge out Gasly's efforts. Anyway, speaking of Esteban and Alpine, here he is, P7. I think this is a hugely important season for Ocon. He's going to be desperate to cement himself as the leader of that team. Ocon has had a few years to firmly embed himself into the team, and it's a place I think he's quite comfortable at. Let's not forget, he has won a race, so I expect some strong performances out of him. And in terms of the Alpine car performance, I think it's the most slept on team in Formula 1. A lot of people seem to forget the sheer power that comes with being a full works team. All of the top 3 teams in Formula 1 make their own engines. A coincidence? I think not. In the modern era of F1, it's vital that a team manufactures its own engine, and Alpine will build on this in 2023. I think the team has a bright future with Esteban firmly in it. Now, moving into the top 3 teams of F1, the worst of the best, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz Jr. In 2022, it felt like Carlos really lost his way. Having nothing short of a shocking start to the 2022 regulations, I was disappointed by Carlos's performances last year. I think that with the departure of Mattia Binotto, we're going to see Ferrari drop back a little bit in the short term, to much of Carlos's detriment. Carlos really needed to prove himself in 2022. in order to not be the Barrichello to Schumacher, but he failed to do that. As a result, I think 2023 will be tough for him, putting him in P6. In P5, I have Sergio Perez. Since joining Red Bull, the reputation that Checo had built up of being some sort of amazing driver has certainly been eroded. He had an okay 2022, but ultimately got stomped by Verstappen, and as a result of some of my other forecasted predictions, the only place I see fit for Checo is P5. In P4, I'm going to put George Russell. I'm a huge fan of George. However, the way I see things, I think that George will slip back in comparison to his teammate this year, though this will be a year where he learns a lot. I think that for George, on his day, he will be great. Though, as we saw last year, in the second half of the season, he can struggle a bit for consistency. Overall, I think as I predict, if needed, George will be asked to be a number 2 should a title fight be on the cards for Lewis, with the view that once Lewis retires, George becomes that solid number 1 driver. 3 drivers left from 3 different teams. If this happens in real life, that would be just awesome. So let me know in the comments, where would you put the top 3 drivers? And please don't send me too much hate for the awful predictions I'm about to make. Matthew Gallagher is crying. In third place, rather controversially, I have Charles Leclerc. The Monegasque driver is up there with the best, though he lacks the relentless consistency and high performance of Max and Lewis. Given the car, Charles looks nailed on to be a world champion at some point. However, for me, that some point is not this point. With the heavy disruption in the Scuderia, I just don't think the car will be quick enough to win that elusive World Drivers title. I do hope that we have quite a close 3-horse race, with Charles being an outside shot of winning the title, though I'd be surprised if he was. In P2 for me is Sir Lewis Hamilton. The sounds coming out of that Mercedes team, who for 7 years looked absolutely bulletproof, are mostly positive. From what I'm reading on Twitter, it looks like they might have built a really quick car. I would be delusional if I thought anything other than the fact that they will be back to at least winning ways in 2023. Of course, this is a bit of a hot take considering last year's performance, but I don't think it's as much of a hot take as many of you might think. We'll have to see how testing goes for the team, but as a Merc fan, I expect a good year. Or at least a better one than last year. I would love to see a Max versus Lewis title battle and ultimately see Lewis win it. However, I do expect Red Bull to be slightly quicker, at least in the early parts of the season, with Lewis and Mercedes perhaps coming up trumps in the second half of the season. So yes, in P1, I'm going to predict Max Verstappen to finish first in the drivers' standings for 2023, securing his 3rd world title. While I am massively predicting Mercedes to be back in 2023, it's undeniable that Red Bull are at the top of their game at the moment. I fully expect them, alongside the most informed driver in the world at the moment, Max Verstappen, to fight in 2023 and most likely go all the way. Looking back at 2022, the Red Bull was the most dominant car by far, and I expect them to be especially strong in the first half of the season. While personally, I'm not a big fan of Max's driving style and over-aggressive racing, Max is an incredibly gifted driver and will probably win the title in 2023. So there it is. There's my predictions for the World Drivers standings in 2023. Please don't roast me too much in the comments, and I would just love to find out what changes you'd make to this list. I do my best to reply to every comment, so let's talk about it. What changes would you make? If you are watching this video right now, whether you're a fan of Max, Lewis, Charles, or even Sargeant, there is a 99.8% chance that you are not subscribed to this channel, so if you could hit that big fat subscribe button, that would be just great. Starting this channel, I didn't expect any major growth in the early stages, but one of my new videos has 30,000 views. So if you came from that video, or any others, I just want to say a big fat thank you, and hey, I'll catch you in the next one. Good morning, good evening, or good night. Thank you.